Okay, hello everybody, welcome back. So everyone who knew who couldn't make it to the first session, hello, everyone who's still here, hi again. Let's hop into the second session for today, the Data Virtuality REST API and how to use it. Again, some information regarding the webinar. It's going to be recorded. You will get all the slides. You will get a recording afterwards. You will get the sample requests. In this course, you will get a Postman collection with all some sample statements. Will all be sent to you at a later point in time after all the master classes are finished. During the course of the webinar, you may ask questions using the Q&A button. If you do not wish for others to know that you ask a question, you can also do this anonymously, and you can hop on and off on all these sessions as you like. Okay, that's it. Let's go and start working with Data Virtuality's REST API. Quick agenda. I will talk just a little bit about motivation, how to access the REST API, give an overview about the different endpoints, what they're used for, and then we will take a little look into each of these individual endpoints, followed by a summary. And of course, I will try to provide a lot of samples for you so you can follow along. And I'll learn some more afterwards. Okay. Why this course? Well, first of all, I want people to know about the API's very existence. Lots of our customers don't even know that Data Virtuality has a built-in REST API, which I personally think is a shame because it's very, very useful. I just like playing with APIs. You don't need a big client. You don't need a website. You can just run some simple commands, build them into your own in-company internal website. You can just embed it basically. Or maybe you just have a tool which would come in very, very handy. Yeah, maybe you're using Jupyter notebooks and you want to write some, write some guides for your people, and it just makes things a lot easier. It integrates into websites with some front ends. Some of our customers I know in the past have created their own self-service portals for their own users, where they just basically create a small website, incorporating the main tasks that they need to do over the day, and they prefer to just call REST API for this. And also another application is maybe you want to trigger some process from outside of Data Virtuality's native tools. Yeah, maybe you have maybe you have a system that's performing a task, and that might be a long-running task. Maybe it's some ETL task, maybe it's a replication, maybe it's just some very, very complicated mathematical calculations that are being done. And only after this has been done, Data Virtuality shall then go ahead with some particular jobs in question. And the running times may vary as usual. And you say it's easier for me to just trigger the job run on Data Virtuality side rather than having a job doing a poll, doing a refresh every 10 seconds or every minute, checking if the job on my source database system, my source technology is done. So yeah, basically webhooks. Yeah, and maybe you also learn a bit about REST APIs in general, and learning by example from Data Virtuality, how we did it. And this might also help you understand some basic concepts, maybe from data sources you already use that are based on REST APIs, but you maybe never found the time to actually delve deeper into the topic and actually understand better what's going under the hood. Okay. Yeah, learning our jobs, we want to learn some of the capabilities of the built-in API. I'm going to show you actual requests to perform various types of tasks. You get a lot of supplementary files. I think there's going to be a GitHub repository after the masterclass, and perhaps we can even, with a community spirit in mind, even maintain these repositories afterwards, and maybe even add some more additional content. One more information, as you can see on the very last item, it says additional files like enabling HTTPS for on-premise can be found there. So by default, especially on-premise installation, are using HTTP, so unsecure communication. And maybe one of the first steps you want to do is, if you want to open the API or want to expose the API to the outside world, or maybe to a partner network, it might be useful, might be recommended, advisable for you to make sure that only secure HTTP traffic is allowed. So there's going to be a document telling you how to enable HTTPS, and then you can disable HTTP basically, or you can just implement a firewall rule blocking traffic. Yeah, some basic information. How can you access the API? Where can you do it and how? So all the sample requests that we do will be HTTP unsecure, and all my samples will use the local host with a dedicated port for on-premise installations. It's a default port that you will use if you're having a Data Virtuality instance hosted by us for you. You will get the Postman collection. If you open this collection, please note that the main collection information already has the authentication provided, and all the requests inherit this authentication information. So if you're just going for each individual request, you won't see the authentication information. You will have to go up to the very top of the entire collection. But I'm going to show you that too. Yeah, I also decided to give you a REST sample file. So this is basically a file that you can push in Visual Studio Code or whatever other tool that you want to use. And one benefit is that you can just write multiple REST state or multiple HTTP requests in just one file. And in case of Visual Studio Code, there's an extension that just creates a one request button right underneath, so you can really just click on it and it's going to run the code for you. Yeah, all my requests were been tested, and I'm showing them now on a 2.3.15 release. API has been around for quite a while, so I'm pretty sure it's going to work for your particular release as well. If you're not sure, just go and give us your release name, and then maybe we can find it out. Or even better, upgrade to next major version, and yeah, be sure to enjoy the latest features and also the latest API version. How can I access the API, you might ask? Yeah, good question. And the answer is that there is a default endpoint that you can use, and it contains your host name or your IP address, and then followed by REST API /REST API. I just noted that there's a typo here. The on-premise customers have to use a different port. So by default, the on-premise port for unsecure combination is 8080, and for HTTPS is 8443. So I'm going to fix this in the slide. So sorry about that. And again, if you want to enable secure requests, or you must enable secure requests, you'll also get the document explaining to you how to do it. Authentication. All requests against the API require basic authentication. Two ways that you can do. One is you put your username and your password inside the URL that you're going to call, which is obviously not a very convenient way, and which is also very prone, because everyone reading your URL can just get your credentials. The preferred way is to add an authorization header to your request, and this authorization header contains the base 64 encoding of your credentials. Okay, this will also be in the notes according to the slides, and there are websites you can just punch into the username, the colon, the password, and it's going to give you the base 64 representation. And you can also do this with Data Virtuality. The samples, I will send you samples on how to do this too. Please remember, all API requests are also subject to permissions. If the user that you're using during the request does not have permission to add the data source, read the tables data, then obviously also the API request is going to fail or just prompt you with an empty result set. And yeah, by calling user, I mean the account whose credentials were used for the basic authentication. Yeah, so please remember, each request must be authenticated. Mechanism is basic authentication, and all requests are subject to permissions. Okay, available endpoints. Let's start with the quickest one. So it's the endpoint /status, and there's really just one operation. It's a get, and it's basically just telling you, is the API available or not? Please let me know. I'm not entirely sure if the syntax highlighting is easy to read or not from the slides. So I wasn't quite sure, so maybe I would also change this before we hand them out. As you can see here, yeah, you have a get, so that's the operation type, then HTTP, localhost, and this is what I mentioned earlier. We have to specify the port because it's not the default port. /REST /API is the main entry point to actually talk to the API. /status triggers the API already to check if it's available. I will show this one as well when I'm going through the first really important bits of actual demos, because it's really just this one request. Source operations. The endpoint source contains a lot of usability, because you can list all available data sources and virtual schemas. You can list the objects inside, so you can list the tables, views, and procedures inside. You can see the contents of a table or view. You can call a stored procedure. You can add a new data source. You can drop an existing data source, and you can bulk call a stored procedure. Yeah, so all these different operations are the ones that you can perform just using the source endpoint. And yeah, so unsupported operations. When I say unsupported, it means just that there's no default endpoint to do this. But as you will see during the session, you can basically use the source endpoint just for all the procedures, and you can just either use an existing procedure that you call in order to implement this this feature, or you can just create your own procedure and then call it from the source endpoint. Okay, so just because there's no source schema create, that doesn't mean that you cannot just use source sysadmin create virtual schema. So yeah, one operation list available data sources. It doesn't take any input. It just returns a list, and each entry in the list contains the name of the data source. And again, only returns what the user is allowed to actually see. And it also returns the list of system schemas. So I would say let's check out the first sample. Okay, so here we have the get API status. So as you can see already, very similar to what you've seen on the slide, localhost, port, and this is fix. It's a get request, so you don't have to send any additional information. And again, the authentication has been done inside this main collection. Okay, so you could even override this and edit, or you just click here and then edit the collection, and then you have here this point authorization, and there you can punch in your username and your password for the entire collection. It's quite nice because it makes it very easy because all the requests inherit the information. So let's send this. And you get down here, you see status is okay, everything's tickety-boo on the API. Okay. Let's get a list of all the data sources and virtual schemas that we have available. So it's just REST API source. And as you can see, all the responses are JSON responses. And it's really just a list of everything that is available. Data sources is a virtual view, Jira is, helpers is, but the as file, for example, is the data source. Yeah. And now, quite nice, we can now basically follow along the path and get deeper and retrieve information from inside one of these schemas or data sources. If we, for example, put another / and type in helpers, we get a list of all the tables, views, and procedures inside this schema. Okay, you can see I get the name of the object, I get the information of the type. I didn't set any description, so this is why all the descriptions are null. But if I had added any comment to any of these objects, then they would be shown here. You can also do the same, for example, with my analytical storage. It's quite a small one. But here we even have a descriptions for one of the objects. So. Okay. So let's just quickly go through the slides so we're not going ahead of ourselves. Okay, yeah. So let's list all the data sources schema contents. So this is basically just means you have the /source / then the name of the data source or virtual schema inside the URL. And as you've already seen, you get the name of each object, the type, that's one of table, view, or procedure. And if it's got a description, then it's also going to be returned. And here's another sample for my analytical storage. This once again also taken from my .rest file. So this is really just what it's going to look like. And again, the token I've seen someone ask is the base 64 encoding of your username followed by a colon followed by the password. Maybe Matthew can just either send you a link to a website where you can just do this on the fly, or maybe he can even provide you with a SQL statement to generate the base 64 representation. It's really just one simple SQL statement. Okay, and now we can traverse this, or we can go even further down the endpoint. Now we've got the /source, we got the name of our virtual schema or data source. Now we can even add another /, punch in the name of a table or a view, and we get all the data from this particular object back. Yeah. So also very convenient, as you've seen so far. We didn't need any special input, right? We didn't take any input at all. So very easy to get some basic information out of the system. One drawback with this approach is, as you can see from the bottom part of the slide, this endpoint always returns the entire data in one go, no pagination. So I would strongly advise and recommend not to try to read a 300 gigabytes table with this approach. Might even be questionable if you should, in general, read this, even with pagination. But in general, just notice pagination is not enabled for this endpoint, so we have to run an explicit query. Going to show you later how to do this. But for smaller tables, they're just a few kilobytes, or maybe just a handful of megabytes in total. That's absolutely fine to do this. Yeah, so what does it look like? Hope you can see that. REST API source, views, and there's a view called v1. And my sample response contains one JSON document for each of the records inside this view. Yeah, and all these columns are also coming from the virtual view. Okay, so let's look at the same in our Postman. Yeah, here we've got again our views. It's listing us one view and one procedure. Okay, let's check that. And you see we just go always further down the line to get more detailed information. Yeah, so it's very easy, very straightforward. Only thing that you really have to do so far is to know how to create your request URL and your authentication token. So list sources and their contents, done that. Okay, I've just changed a little bit the order, but I thought it might be useful to just see the very first samples alongside the slides so we can actually have a better understanding of the situation and of the usage. Now, what if we want to execute the stored procedure? Well, we can still do this inside the source endpoint, but now it's going to be slightly different. First of all, it's not a get operation any longer, it's a post operation. Okay, so wherever you used get before, you need to use post. And every API call requires the header content type application JSON. If you don't have the header, some of the requests still might succeed, but others might fail, and you will spend a whole lot of time figuring out why. Just always use the content type application JSON, and you're good. Also, addition, every API call for procedure execution, even if the procedure itself does not have any input parameters, requires a request body. And if you see the third bullet item that is not filled, it says an empty JSON for procedure without input parameters. So the least that you need is opening curly braces and closing curly braces. Okay. So if you bulk execute a procedure, then you get an array of JSON documents back, one entry for each procedure call that you had. Yeah. So one simple application is you want to know which is the data source that you're currently using as your analytical storage platform. And there's the procedure called sysadmin.getCurrentDWH. As you can see from the slide, it's really just the same pattern as before. Now, however, there's the additional content type, application JSON, and also opening and closing square braces. Sample response then is going to be the response. That's what you also get when you just execute the same stored procedure on Data Virtuality via the Studio. Yeah, and again, additional header and a request body. Very important. If you forget any of these, you're sure to end up with an error. Okay, just for the sake of demonstration, I created an additional procedure called solve quadratic equations. This now takes 3 input parameters, A, B, and C, and it's going to give me 2 solutions. Yeah, one positive and one negative solutions. And now you can see the JSON document is not empty any longer. Instead, it's a list of JSON properties. So the property name always has to correspond with the parameter names of the procedure that you're going to call, followed by a colon, and then depending on the data type, if it's just a number, you put in the number. If it's a string or maybe a timestamp, you also have to put the timestamp in double quotes. Okay, very important to know how to provide the input data. Now, if I'm going to run the same procedure now for two inputs, yeah, as you can see, I've just slightly altered one of the input parameters. B is not -1, but -2 for the second set of inputs. And now my sample response contains 2 procedure outputs. Okay, so it's a very convenient way to run the same procedure against multiple sets of input parameters. Okay, well then, let's take a look. Okay, yeah, just one more time. Get current analytical storage platform, get current DWH. And this is the only actual part that is really important right now. If we send this, I get the information that in Data Virtuality, it's the data source named DWH. And in native in data source, it's called public. So it could be a database name, could also be a schema name, depending on the type of data source. Yeah. So let's go here over to the body. I hope you can see that. Yeah. And that's all I need to do. Body, procedure name, and the post operation. Let's do another one. Okay, this time I've gone with my quadratic equation that I want to solve. You also get the sample procedure for this particular call alongside with all the other samples. And I think there are also 1 or 2 additional view definitions that you will get, just so you can follow along and so that all the sample requests are going to succeed on your end. Let's send it. And I'm going to get 2 solutions. Yeah, just slightly inconveniently represented, but this is how you run this. Okay, yeah, very simple, very straightforward. Let's do it again with more than 1 input set. And here is the first result set from this procedure execution, and this one is the second result set for the procedure execution. Okay, so you see, procedure execution is very handy, very easy to do. So one might even argue that it's easier to create dedicated procedures when you want to use the REST API rather than send slightly more complex queries. Okay, now we come to the data source related operations. Well, obviously you can always drop an existing data source, provided you've got the right permission. Just be careful because this operation is permanent. There's not going to be another response asking you whether you're sure or not to drop the data source. If you delete it, it's going to be gone. It does not work with virtual schemas, so it's really just limited to data sources. But again, there's a procedure inside the sysadmin schema to drop a virtual schema that you can use, or you could just create your own procedure. There's no request body needed, so no no curly braces here, really just the delete operation and the endpoint URL, and you're good. This is what it would look like if I want to remove a data source called file_src. As you can see, purple, that's the operation, that's the delete. Again, similar to reading the file data source, I really just replaced one operation with another one. I also don't need to provide a content type any longer because this operation doesn't have an actual request body. And this is a response header. You get a 200 code telling you, yep, everything's fine, or not if you inadvertently remove the wrong data source. Creating a data source. This one is slightly more complex, and it's very similar to the approach that you would use when you do this via SQL, except for one thing. Creating a data source in Data Virtuality always consists of two parts: a connection, which mainly contains the information on how to reach the other system, like host, port, credentials, name of the database, or web service web service endpoint, and a create data source statement, which contains the actual information to tell Data Virtuality which tables to read. Full schema nameless, yes or no. Do we want to read tables or views or only tables? These additional informations that are not concerned with the connection to the source, but rather how to read data and metadata from the source. When you use the REST API, then only one API request is needed. So basically these two procedures are merged into one API request. Yeah. They contain the same parameters, the same properties as the procedure parameters, just merged. If you're not entirely sure how you need to build this call in order to create the data source, you can always learn by creating a sample data source in Data Virtuality via the Studio. Use the export wizard to export this particular data source only, and then you get the create connection and create data source statement, and then you can basically assemble your corresponding API request. Sounds more complex than it actually is. Here we've got the input parameters, the target name for the new data source that you want to create, the CLI template telling which is the underlying, which basically creates the connection, the underlying application server, the translator telling Data Virtuality which backend component to use in order to talk to this particular data source, some additional properties like the connection properties, host, and so forth, model properties, and then also translator properties that can be very specific, only supported by very small subset of the data sources that are available. Okay, here are some samples. How can you create a data source? The name is going to be ds_ms_adventureworks. The template is MS SQL. The translator is SQL Server. Again, I don't know all these different parameters and which possible values. I also sort of learned in the process when working with data virtually, and sometimes also just fiddling around. I've got the connection properties, host port, database name, username, password, and the model properties. And I also got this default translator property that it's needed for MS SQL Server. Okay. So here you already have your very first template. Also, if you need a template for any specific type of data source, let us know. If you can't wrap your head around it, we can easily provide you with a template for you to use. There's another way of creating a file type data source. So you see template translator or view file. You only have the connection property pointing to the location of the actual folder that you want to read. And the model property is just default. So there's not much actually to configure. Yeah. So this is the actual request. Please notice again that now we're using a post request. So post request always means we have to specify a content type and we have to provide an actual request content, actual request body. And this is just all the different settings that you've seen on the previous slide embedded inside a beautiful JSON document. Yeah, so it's all you have to do. Okay, let's see if we can do it on our own. Okay, let's try to see if we can drop the data source called file_source. I just need one quick moment to make sure that it's currently available, because after all, we want to see this command succeed. No, it's going to be called ds_file. You see, delete. There's no request body, no additional parameters. That's really just everything we have to do. Okay, and in this case, an empty result is a good result because this means that the operation was successful. Let's now try to add a local MS SQL server. Okay, this one now gets slightly more complex. It's still a post, right? So every time you want to remove something from Data Virtuality, it's a delete. If you want to add something or you want to update something, it's going to be a post request. We have the name of the data source that we want to create. Template is MS SQL, translator SQL Server, and then there's a list of all the properties that we need for the connection to be established. The model properties telling Data Virtuality how and which metadata to read and how to interpret this metadata. And then there's an additional translator property that we have to set. Okay, so let's have this very, very secure password. And also succeeded. What we can now do is we can just try and see if this has been actually created, then we should be able to get a list of tables, right? So if we just get back to our, let's go list of views, right? So we just want to see the list of the data source that we just created. This should succeed. And so it does, yeah? So we can even use the API to immediately validate if the data source has been added successfully. Okay, let's go back to our slides. So this is one major stepping stone done. The second part of the REST API is the query endpoint. Okay, and the query endpoint allows you to literally send every SQL statement that you can natively send via Studio, via web interface, also via the REST API. Okay. There are two ways that you can send queries. You can use them via post request. Again, post means we need to send a request body webbed inside the JSON document, or you can also run your queries via a GET. This is possible. You have to URL encode your entire SQL statement, and it's going to have your SQL statement as part of your endpoint URL. And it is possible, but it looks It's not very beautiful. It looks, yeah, judge for yourself in a minute, but I don't really like it. So I really prefer the post because it's clearer, it's easier to read. When you have larger result sets, obviously larger with the term large is always subject to your personal preference, but as soon as the threshold for the time to retrieve a whole data source has been crossed that you set for yourself, you can start with pagination. Pagination uses 2 additional parameters, limit and offset, and these basically allow you to always read the next chunk or the next page of the result set. Result sets can be an array of objects or a 2-dimensional array of single values. And you can specify if you want to have a header alongside your 2-dimensional array. Okay. Yeah. And obviously, if you got a specific task that you want to do and you don't want to create an additional stored procedure because you say it's already there, I just need to use it, but it's slightly more complex than just source, sysadmin, and then maybe procedure name, you can simply create a query and send this query to the API through this endpoint. Okay, there are quite a lot of input parameters. We don't need ever all of them at the same time. But let's quickly go through them. Array tells you if you want to give the result set as a 2-dimensional array. I don't like it, so I always set it to false. If you have the array set, then you can decide if you want to have one array appended to the result set. This is going to be the array with all the header information, and the last 4 parameters are for pagination. Right? If you send the very first request, first query that you want to paginate, then you use the pagination parameter, and this tells Data Virtuality, please notice the request ID, and alongside the first page of the result set, please also send me the request ID and then the limit and offset so that I can iterate through the entire result set one by one. Okay, SQL with post. Not that much new, requires post operation, content type. The input parameter has just one attribute that's called SQL, and this gets the request to be executed, right? You just have a JSON document with one property and one value. Please remember, since JSON already uses double quotes for strings, if you have a SQL statement that it itself uses double quotes, you have to escape them, or the backslash, and all the parameters we think can be used as they are defined. Okay, let's start with a very simple example. This one is going to use a post and give us the result set as a 2-dimensional array. I decided to explicitly set the headers. And you have here SQL, and the statement is just a select star from sys.schema. So that's all there is to it. And as you can see, the double quotes surrounding sys.schemas have to be escaped. Now the response, what does the response look like? So the very first array is the list of headers, and then follows multiple arrays of the actual data. Okay, and now you see why it's a 2-dimensional array, because it's an array of arrays. So that's one way that you can perform a post operation with a customized SQL statement. A slightly more appealing version, at least to me, is using array equals false, hence creating simple JSON documents for the output. Same input query, but now we got, again, sets of pairs, property name, property value. So we don't need to have one additional array or set of values just for the headers, because each document provides the headers. Now, what if we want to do the pagination? So this gets slightly more complex, but let's just try to do everything step by step. So if we take a look at the query URL, we still have array equals false, just because I want to keep this style of results representation till the end. And now the very first query gets this parameter pagination equals true. But if we want to use pagination, we also need to set a limit, because the limit basically says what is the page size, how many records do we want to get with each response from the API, right? So on this scenario, I used the number 10. And also the very first call does not have as an offset. Okay, we don't skip any records. Similar, but not a similar way we provide the SQL statement, select star from sys.schemas, all as we know it, just pagination true, limit 10, this is just what I'm going with here, and offset 0, so we don't skip any of the very first records. And now if we get the response, we have to make sure that we also await the response header so that we actually know how to proceed. And here you see that we get a request ID. So this is the ID of the request generated on Data Virtuality side. And alongside the request ID, we also get the next page. And that's very convenient because the next page already contains the entire URL to the next batch of the result set. Yeah, the request ID, limit, and it already contains the offset of 10. Yeah, all auto-generated. Yeah, obviously, alternatively, we could just do calculate and assemble the URL on our own, but it's just quicker and easier to do. And the nice thing is now we can decide if we want to do every subsequent query using a post with an empty content, because we don't need to resend the same query, right? The request ID tells Data Virtuality which is the query over which results do we want to iterate, or we can even now use a GET request. Yeah, so very convenient way we can say, okay, for the very first request we need a post, but for all the subsequent requests we can use GET, or if we want to have it all identical or more consistent, we can still use post, but we don't need to send the query any longer. Yeah. And again, note the request ID is set, but the pagination parameter is gone. So this is really just necessary for the very first request that you send for your SQL statement. Okay, let me open. So, okay, here we get again the post, and I've gone up with the sys.schemas. And here we get an array of arrays. Yeah. If I remove the headers entry, or if I explicitly set it to false, so it's going to have the same result. Now you see, we only get the result set, but we don't know which are the column names any longer. So if you're going with a two-dimensional array, the headers might actually be very useful. And here they are again. Now, if we rather want to have a list of JSONs, we explicitly have to set array equals false. Sys.schemas, and let's run this. Yeah. Looks very nice. Okay, let's hop to the sample with the pagination. Yeah, one nice thing is that, for example, Postman parses your URL, and you have this very nice key value pairs that you see here. So you can see, okay, I set pagination to true, limit is 10 and offset is 0. And this is all automatically read from the endpoint URL that I specified. Body is still the same, sys.schemas. And if I send this, so first I get a result, okay, but that's not all. I also get the headers. Yeah, hope you can all see this. And there's the next page. So let me just copy this, because obviously my sample, the sample that I have, contains a different request ID. Notice that this is 9264. And this one has a different. And now we're getting the next chunk. And also, as we discovered earlier, we can also use the GET request now, because all subsequent calls don't require a post any longer. Okay, yeah, and again, as you can really put in here every SQL statement that is available. Yeah, if it's a SQL statement can be executed, even if it doesn't have any results set. Yeah, even if you just, I don't know, maybe you want to trigger a metadata refresh, if you just want a job. So very, very flexible right here. And also remember, if you want to, if you need pagination, you should use queries. If the typical task that you want to do, or the data that you want to retrieve, does not require for pagination, you might as well just use the source endpoint. Okay, yeah. What about unsupported operations? I mean, unsupported as such, there's nothing really unsupported. There might be only some other functionalities maybe not yet available, or not yet in a way as you would think it is, but you can always use the source endpoint to add your own logic, to add missing logic, or to add different type of logic. Yeah. For example, you can drop a virtual schema by its ID, but maybe you say, okay, but dropping a virtual schema by ID is not very convenient. I would like to drop my virtual schema via its name. Yeah, so we create a stored procedure, which does exactly that. And then we can use the source endpoint to call this stored procedure, provide the name of the virtual schema, and hey presto, we got it working. Yeah. We can refresh all the failed data sources, as I already said, or we can even trigger a job run based on the job's description. Okay, so I created some additional requests. Yeah, obviously, in order to implement these extra changes, I had to create virtual procedures. Yeah. You will also get a data virtuality export for these virtual procedures, so you can add them to your own system and try them out on your own. Let me quickly create a schema called schema1 on my system. And it's done. Yeah, I know it's quite tricky at the moment to follow along, but I can share my window right now with me from the studio. So let's go and start a job by your ID. Okay, usually if you want to trigger a job, you need to add a job schedule of type once with the job ID, and you have to say it's supposed to be enabled and it doesn't have an have a sleep before the job one starts. So I put this all into one procedure. Let's run it. This is one of the built-in jobs, and let me show you that this. So this is job number 6. So that's the one we just used, and you can see 1620. That's just a few seconds ago, and you also see it still shows schema 1 here. Not any longer because we dropped it. Yeah. So here the helper procedures will all be available for you. You can start a job by description, or I also implemented this start by job ID. That's what we just did. Or you can start a job by description. This particular case, however, this only works if your job description across Data Virtuality is unique. Okay, so it's made in a way that only one job can exist. Otherwise, you could use a table statement and then run all the jobs with the same descriptions. Okay, let's go back once more to the Postman. And here you have start job by job description. This is the exact same job with job ID 6, just a different approach. Yeah, so a lot of possibilities, really a lot of flexibility, because you can easily just implement your own views, your own procedures, call them from the API, and these are, you can basically use these as webhooks, especially if you think of the start job by ID or start job by description. If you got a system that that's supposed to do some long running tasks or some tasks that you don't know about the actual running time, and it's got any type of capability to just send a post request, do it. Yeah, and then just basically trigger your job chain from the outside world, from outside of Data Virtuality. Okay. So that was, again, quite a lot of information. So we checked how can we call the API, where can I find the API. We've learned that different ports are used, whether it's on-premise installation or cloud hosted by Data Virtuality. The status endpoint, the source endpoint with all its capabilities, list data sources and schemas, the tables and views, the procedures. You can run a procedure, you can bulk execute again a procedure, so this might be very useful. You can delete existing data sources, you can add new data sources. This might actually require a little bit of time, a little bit of brain work to actually follow along and understand the process. But once you're in it, once you understood how it works and how you can create your own templates based on the data source that you already have, it's really easy. And we also check the query endpoint, allowing us to send custom SQL to the Data Virtuality server, how to use pagination, and how to read the response header in order to get the next URL that we need in order to get the next page of our result set. And yeah, if there's anything that we're not quite happy with or anything that we need is not the way we would want it to implement, we can just create our own dedicated virtual schema, some source procedures that implement the logic, and then call these procedures via the source endpoint, via the query endpoint, bulk execute these procedures, and yeah, hopefully get some automation done, some automated operations based on web service requests. Okay. Yeah, if you have any further questions, let us know. There's also going to be a survey. If you have still any question marks hovering above your head, let us know. If you think it was not enough, it was too much, yeah, provide us please any type of feedback imaginable.
Martin, there's one question still open from our Q&A panel. You might want to have a look at it. Probably you can reply to it right now.
Yeah, encrypted passwords. Yeah, that's a good question actually. So at the moment, you cannot send there are not encrypted parameters in the for the API requests right now. It's going to be implemented in the future. But there's also one drawback, because the encrypted value, for example, of your password would have to be the encrypted version of data virtuality. So right now, even if this were there, this property, you would basically have to create a sample data source with this particular password so that you can get the encrypted string. Yeah. So the encrypted properties will be there in the future. They're not here, they're not built in at the moment, they're planned and in development. But even if they were, still remember that the encrypted password would have to be encrypted by data virtuality. Yeah. Okay. If you need any help, your data virtuality server comes already with a built-in documentation. Just go to the built-in web server /REST, and there you will find again all the information regarding authentication, pagination, some additional samples. If you're more interested in the topic, check the help center. If you think there's some information missing, you want to know more, go to the help center, get involved in the community. Let us know what you think. Let us know if there are any features missing. Just as Florian just proposed, yeah, just we provide us feedback anyway, positive, negative. And yeah, thanks a lot for listening. Hope you could learn a thing or two. Hope you're going to all now start fiddling with the REST API. And yeah, I'll be off, and hopefully see you next time.
Don't start just yet, because we got one more session still coming up.
Yeah,
so,
No.
I will take over now. Let's take a 5-minute break. As always, if you have any questions, you can always put them into the Q&A, and in 5 minutes we will meet again. And my session will be much more lightweight, so you can rest a little bit and recover from Martin's very detailed technical stuff. And it's been very, very great. So thank you, Martin, very, very much for your detailed presentation here. It was very awesome from my point of view, but we will see the feedback from the users as well.
Yeah, my pleasure.